How did the guy closest to regulators with meetings in the White House, connections to World Economic Forum, all this, when you lay out all the facts, it's hard to believe that this is just someone who took too much risk and maybe committed fraud. Like maybe it was that. But also in the pursuit of truth, I think it's worth asking, what if things aren't the way we thought they were? What is this? What are we looking at?
Sorry to say, but I think, Luke, that what we're looking at is a symbol of the entire global financial system. And what I mean by that is everybody who's been following this story by now will know FTX was hollow, that Sam Bankman-Fried was a fraud, in fact, was a front man for a con job. And I say front man, I use the word front man deliberately, because there's no way, being 45 years old as I am, being detained at the age of 24 in Egypt for attempting to overthrow the Egyptian government after having founded my former group in Pakistan and the Danish-Pakistani chapter in Denmark. In other words, I'm somebody who joined that group at 16, was imprisoned at 24. I know what it takes to be young and try and change the world and its consequences. And speaking from experience, Luke, I can tell you for a fact, there's absolutely no way that I believe that Sam Bankman-Fried, at the age he was, became a billionaire at that speed and did the things he did, met with Blair and met Clinton and set up a money laundering scheme through Ukraine, all of which can be demonstrated, that went straight back. US taxpayer funds went to Ukraine. FTX had a relationship with Ukraine. Those funds ended up, as is all now established in even the corporatist media, those funds ended up back in the Democratic Party coffers. And Sam Bankman-Fried happens to be from a family that is heavily involved in Democratic Party fundraising. So that's why I use the word front man for a con job. There's absolutely no way that I can accept from experience that somebody that young got tied up in something that complicated, that dangerous, that financially irresponsible, all on his own devices. He was a front man for a scheme.
There's only one way out from here, and that's up.
We're going up! It's $100 million. That's a lot of money.
And that scheme, unfortunately, when I started by saying it's symbolic, the scheme is a microcosm of the way in which our global financial system operates. So you look at what happened to FTX, the same pattern is repeated in the 2008 economic crash. In fact, the same pattern is repeated in every economic crash. And these crashes, because of our current financial system, happen to be cyclical. And what it comes to, Luke, is this. What it comes down to is that this money simply doesn't exist. It's all hype. It's all bubbles. It's all based upon expectations, promises, hype, and belief. And because the people that control these financial markets have significant interests in corporatist media platforms and political platforms, they can control that unholy trinity that is required to sustain that belief until it all comes crashing down, because ultimately every pyramid scheme must come crashing down. So if you control corporatist media and the headlines, and if you control political leaders through donations, and you control the levers of those two things, which is the financial markets, you can pretty much sustain that bubble for as long as Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX were able to do. The alarm bells for anybody looking, being there from the beginning. Because somebody that's been following the Ukraine war and took the stance as I have from the beginning, and I mentioned it on my appearance with Rogan right at the start of the war, that this whole thing is a scam and that Zelensky is a crook and that he is involved in money laundering. The US taxpayers' money has been sent to Ukraine ostensibly for purposes of helping the everyday Ukrainian, which turns out to be, in the case of FTX, false. Billions have disappeared, but the Ukrainian government were involved. And Zelensky, prior to the war, if you look at the way the media treated it, we have these papers which you look involved in the crypto world, as you would have heard, the Panama leaks and the Pandora leaks. Now, these leaks, through the investigative journalists around the world, have demonstrated through these leaks that a lot of the world's leaders had dodgy offshore accounts. And I include my parents' country, Pakistan, in that, because it led to the downfall of the prime minister there, Nawaz Sharif. And if you see the political instability in Pakistan at the moment, Imran Khan, who became prime minister after Nawaz Sharif's downfall and after his arrest and charge for this money laundering and corruption, Imran Khan became prime minister. But of course, after the Ukraine war, he was ousted because he happened to be visiting Putin in Moscow to try and negotiate energy deals for Pakistan. And now he's leading, a bit like you see in Brazil, and a bit like you see in the US, a popular uprising against the establishment. The establishment in Pakistan came back to power after they ousted him when Biden became president. And so what I'm alleging here, to join the dots, is that there's a global bankers cartel. And that global bankers cartel, as I mentioned in my recent appearance, Tucker Today, Tucker Carlson, I went into this in some detail. This global bankers cartel control the flow of money, international finance via the international banker settlements and the private central banks in every country. They are opaque. Nobody knows how and who sits on their board, who runs them and who controls them. It's an opaque international global financial system. It chooses to fund countries, entire countries, political parties, left wing or right wing, doesn't matter, as long as you align with their global economic agenda. And that's where we have to begin. And FTX was a small piece of that puzzle, but the way in which it operated is why I began by saying it's symbolic of the problem on a deeper scale. The way in which it operated is exactly how our global financial system operates. Our global financial system and the fiat money we use is as empty, as hollow as FTX. And we're witnessing that at the moment with runaway inflation, quantitative easing, with central banks deciding that the way out of their problem, because all of this money continuously being embezzled from people, put into offshore accounts. For them, the way out of it is to keep printing more money. Of course, the more you do that, the more worthless the money becomes, which is what's causing the inflation. So I take the view that this is Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. They're not one-off. Anyone who thinks this is incredibly naive about the way the global financial system operates. This is inherent to the way in which our financial system is set up. And if you think FTX is a problem, wait till you start looking into our fiat money system and just how hollow and how empty that is, and how that in itself has sustained the same illusions that FTX was sustained for many years, for many months at least.
You often tweet out that you kind of tell people to resist. And in your bio, you're telling people to resist democratization of truth.
Yeah.
What does that mean in relation to this, the democratization of truth?
One of the problems we've got is, as happened with the invention of the printing press and the democratization of the access to information, what that leads to is a breakdown of authority. Now, the modern equivalent of that is the invention of the internet. And with the printing press, what happened is that the monopolization of information shifted from the church to basically those that control the media. So there was a shift in power, and that, of course, took a 30 years war for that shift to play out, because any shift in power that significant leads to conflict. But the printing press invention, the Gutenberg press, led to a taking of power from the theocratic church, set up and moved it towards capitalism. That's where we are at the moment. Now, the invention of the internet heralds another such shift, and part of that will be conflict. And it's the conflict that we're currently living through, the tension, the global instability. At least, thankfully, it's not a 30 years war, though we see this conflict in some places is hot wars, such as in Ukraine, Syria before that. In other places, in the US, in the UK, it's no less a conflict, but it's just not a hot war. It could be considered a cold war. But the whole world is currently in this conflict, and the conflict is about the fact that the internet is disrupting the traditional power hierarchies, and in the way it's doing it is it's disrupting the monopoly on the narrative the printing press used to be able to sustain. And so what I'm saying is, when I say resist the democratization of truth, is that can go one of two ways. It can either go, once you break down the monopoly on the narrative, it can either end up that everybody has their own truth, and there's no such thing as reality, and everybody's living in their own isolated bubbles and their own versions of reality. Of course, the problem with that is that we're then bereft of any criteria to have any conversation and resolve any dispute whatsoever, because we'll never be able to agree on a common basis to resolve that dispute. And when that happens, when you end up with the democratization of truth in that way, the only thing that matters is power, which is why it inevitably, this direction, so there's two directions. This one direction where everyone lives in their own bubble, everyone has their own version of truth, it will inevitably lead to authoritarianism, because the only way you can then unify anybody in the context of a nation state and everything that entails is by using power to force the boundaries of what's acceptable when everyone has different versions of truth. And so then power becomes the only thing that matters. And those that hold that power become the masters of the planet, and everybody else becomes their slave. It doesn't matter what's in your head about what you think the truth is. Power, I mean, it's like Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan to get punched in the face. Power will just basically deal with any of that. You can think you're the best thing since sliced bread. Power's just going to come along and become its slave. So that's one problem. That's what I'm saying we have to resist. We're in a moment right now that's incredibly, incredibly significant for what happens in the future of life on this planet. It's as important as the invention of the printing press and the entire revolution, mental, spiritual, emotional, everything that came with that in human existence. We're in that moment. The internet is doing that on a scale far quicker and far greater than the printing press ever did. So in one sense, we're very lucky to be alive in this incredibly important time. But what comes with that is this problem. It's going to lead to this conflict, this tension, and that one direction I've just spelled out is the direction I believe we have to resist. However, not everyone agrees with me. That's the direction that people that I call globalists have decided to take, because they've decided the other way is too difficult. I'll get to the other way in a second. But globalists have decided that because the internet has meant that Maajid and Luke can sit here and say that FTX and its collapse and loss of billions and Sam Bankman-Fried's fraud is symptomatic of our entire financial system. Of course, there are some people running our financial system that hear those words and panic. And so they've decided that, okay, that's Maajid's truth. That might be Luke's truth. But the way that we get around this is some people have their own truth. Some people that look like me and have a beard and tell you that they're a woman and they want you to call them she. That's their truth, right? So the way to get around it, according to those that currently don't want their power to diminish, as I said, would be authoritarianism. So you bring in a new system as this one collapses. You bring in central banking digital currencies, which are not currencies, they're coupons. So the acronym CBDC, central banking digital currencies, I refuse to call it that. I call it central banking digital coupons. And those in power who don't want to lose their power have decided that the increased authoritarianism, what comes with that would mean abolishing cash, because, as I said, they keep printing money and it's becoming worthless, and the illusion is falling away as a result. So to replace it with the central banking digital coupons that are programmable, that are entirely traceable. In other words, it's surveillance tech. It records every single thing you do. And the worst part, it will be synchronized with all your other data, your browsing history, your health data, your criminal record, all on one centralized system. And then, of course, if you behave in a way that they don't like, they can switch your money off, as we saw in Canada with the truckers, and as we saw in the Netherlands, the farmers, and as we saw with the kickboxing champion Andrew Tate. But before all of that, and this is important to say this, and I always say this because it's always forgotten, as has been done for years to ethnic minority communities, and in particular Muslims. We've had our bank accounts switched off for many years by now. I talking about myself, had our HSBC shut our US bank account down in 2008. No explanation, but nobody back then gave that because, of course, it's war on terror. PayPal banned us in around 2015. We've been dealing with this for years. Suddenly, because it's gone mainstream, people are waking up to it. I'm glad, but there's a lesson here, and that is that when ethnic minorities have been complaining about this stuff for years and years, perhaps that's because every instrument of tyranny is tested on them first, including invasion of countries, including locking them up without charge, as was done to us, right? So now we see that in terms of COVID-19. So we've got to understand this has all been tried and tested. And those people that try, they try to work out why are they so angry, those brown people. Well, now you see why we are so angry. Anyway, so that's route number one. Route number two is what I'm saying we must now try and grapple with. It's a challenge that has no guaranteed success. But if you understand that the monopoly on narrative is being broken down by the internet, as the printing press did to the Bible, the internet is now doing to the printing press. The other monopoly that's being broken because of the end of, or the collapse of, soon to be kind of end of the reign of fiat currency, or at least its reputation tatters, The other monopoly that's being broken is the monopoly on finance. Now, whoever controls the money supply and the narrative has the power, but these two right now in this moment we live in are being democratized, both the narrative through the internet and the money supply through decentralized cryptocurrencies and what the potential of what they could represent. And here in particular, I'm thinking Bitcoin, perhaps Monero, any decentralized cryptocurrency that doesn't rely on a centralized point of failure, which clearly FTX, you can see the difference there. But this democratizes access to the money supply. Now, in this moment, as I said, route one is to try and see all that mess and just consolidate power and end up becoming a dictatorship or a tyranny. Route two is to recognize that decentralization is the asset. Decentralization is the thing to embrace. And when recognizing that, we understand that we have to try and imagine and then formulate a new way of living, a new system that caters to this new reality in opposite direction to tyranny and autocracy and power. And that would mean more direct democracy. It would mean more local governance. It would mean more referenda-style democratic participation in our own affairs. I'm not particularly against cash. I prefer it if it's linked to the gold standard. I think that's much better. As Muslims have been arguing for years, by the way, for 1400 years to be precise, but that's another story. But I think cash should be linked to the gold standard, but even if it's not, I'm not averse to its existence. As long as we recognize it's built on an illusion the government promises to keep for you, the illusion that is, fine. But the most important thing is decentralization. So if there is cash and if the government insists on bringing in central banking digital coupons, then what I call the exit route must be preserved. In other words, because cash is so flimsy and might die away, we don't want to ever be left in a scenario where we only have CBDCs, central banking digital coupons, because that means total technocratic slavery forever. It means we'll have absolutely no choice in our affairs. So the exit route means let's make sure that we preserve not only the existence, but access to decentralized cryptocurrencies. And when I make this point, I'm not interested in getting involved in the conflicts between whether Bitcoin is the best one, the maximalists, or whether it's Monero, whether it's Ether. For me, I just stipulate what has to happen, and then everybody else can hash it out. Fine, but what has to exist is a decentralized ability to buy and sell if one chooses anonymously, and if one doesn't mind, then it doesn't have to be anonymous. In other words, as cash is. I could give you between us right now, under this metaphoric desk right there, you go, look, there's £10. Now, no one has to know about that. And then you say, what's that £10 for? I say, I want to buy your microphone. Obviously, it's worth £10, right? And then now no one has to know that. You can give me that microphone. That's your business and my business. If we choose for people to know that, you can so choose. But if we want that to be a private exchange, that's our right for that to be a private exchange. So those are the principles that have to be defended. It has to be decentralized, which means no government can control it. No government can print as much of it as it likes. No government can therefore manipulate it. And that ends the boom and bust cycles, which are based upon the manipulation that governments engage in to launder their money. And then, of course, the anonymity, if we so choose. So you deal with that whole surveillance problem. And ultimately, it cannot be programmable because it's not controlled by a government, unlike CBDCs. So I can't say to you, right, with that £10 now, you can't buy a hamburger or a steak because you've had too much meat today. You can only buy bugs, which is, again, the World Economic Forum's agenda. And by the way, just 2 days ago here in Britain, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's dad, his name is Stanley Johnson, confirmed in a news interview with one Lois Perry on GB News for Mark Stein's show. When asked about this, he said, if it means some of you can't fly on airplanes because you met your carbon credits, then so be it. If that's part of the national plan, that's a direct quote. So anyway, that's the second route has to be that we preserve those things, the principles I mentioned, anonymity, decentralization, we preserve the off-ramp. If it means that meanwhile we're also dealing with cash sometimes, and CBDCs exist because governments insist on them and we're obviously not that powerful to stop, then let them, fine. I'm not going to, let them do what they want. But if cash exists, preferably on the gold standard, but fair enough. And if decentralized alternatives exist, we can begin, we meaning all of us who care about not ending up in technocratic tyranny, can begin to carve out a future based on that decentralization. And if we have decentralized finance, it's inevitable we'll end up with decentralized governments.
Yeah, this moment feels like you described how different groups of people can have these different versions of the truth. But this moment that's happening right now with FTX, even people that are just kind of solely focused on crypto, right? And that exists in so many different areas of life. People get focused in one area of life and they kind of tune everything else out. The people that are solely focused on crypto generally just like to trade, invest, maybe they like potential here, are now waking up to a lot of these other ideas. It's kind of being thrown in their face and they have to admit, like, what am I looking at? So I'm really excited to dive into I want to talk about three of the biggest facts here with this story, and without it coming across as, because I've kind of proposed some of the details of what's been going down, and anyone who's been interested in this has been tweeting out what they're finding. And some people look at this, I don't know if they're incentivized to do this, or if they say, you're just spreading conspiracies, that's ridiculous, don't make this bigger than it is. But if we just look at the facts, I think that's a good starting point that everyone can agree on, and then they can make draw their own conclusions from it. Let's start with this. What is the World Economic Forum? Because there is a fact that Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX was partnered with the World Economic Forum, which is especially strange considering traditional finance, the monetary system that rules the world, tries to distance themselves at every chance they get from crypto. But now it comes out that the biggest fraud in the entire industry, one of the worst financial collapses, I think, as history goes on, will show, what just happened, they were closely tied. They were affiliated with the World Economic Forum. What is the World Economic Forum? Like, what's going on there? What are they supposed to do?
The World Economic Forum, the best way to think of the World Economic Forum is, do you know in the Marvel movies? So, the superhero movies, the Marvel movies that Hollywood makes. And you've got Iron Man and you've got Captain America and you've got that whole group that are networked together to try and save the world. Best way to understand the World Economic Forum is it's the Magneto version of that, right? So the guy that controls things with his mind, and he has the evil version of the X-Men working with him to try to fight the X-Men. So you've got, another analogy is Lex Luthor from the Superman movies, right? You've got this guy called Klaus Schwab, who is a global comic book version of, I use this phrase pejoratively, not as a compliment. He's a global mastermind in the pejorative sense. He's got a network around the world called the World Economic Forum. Part of that network has this thing called the Young Leaders of the World Economic Forum, the global young leaders. He's on the record in multiple places, not least the speech he gave at Harvard University that I played for Rogan on my chat with him on JRE, where Klaus Schwab has boasted that the graduates of his Young Leaders program from the World Economic Forum have, and look, English isn't his first language, but it's still hilarious. He unfortunately used the word penetrated, right? He said they penetrate in a thick German accent. So I'm not going to try and copy it. He said Z instead of D. It was just there. But they basically said they penetrated the cabinets around the world. That's a direct quote of Klaus Schwab. And in that quote, again, Harvard University, I encourage anyone who wants to look into this further, either go to my Radical Media Substack or go to my chat with Rogan on JRE and actually play the speech of Klaus Schwab saying this, where he says he penetrated the cabinets around the world. And he names Trudeau in Canada, he names Macron, but we know you look into who these global leaders are and a pattern starts emerging. Jacinda Ardern, you start in New Zealand, right? You start realizing that all those heads of state or leaders of countries that were very strict in imposing COVID mandates, vaccine mandates, lockdowns, locking people into their homes, internment, all of those people that were behind the worst encroachment of our civil liberties in history. And that's not hyperbole, because it was done in synchronicity. It was done together all around the world. That's never been done before. Just imagine the whole world was told to lock down. It is an unbelievable encroachment on the planet's human beings' civil liberties. All of those leaders that were fiercest in doing that happen to also be graduates of the Young Leaders World Economic Forum. And then you go a bit further and you realize that Klaus Schwab has written a book, and the book's called The Great Reset. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's actually the title of the book he's written. And you start looking at the speeches that the world leaders were making during the peak of the COVID mandates, and all of them, like we're speaking now, and you can see my name right there, wherever it is. You can see my name, and it says Maajid Nawaz, and yours says Venture Coin. They had Build Back Better underneath them as they were speaking. You can see videos with Boris Johnson, with Trudeau, with Jacinda Ardern, with Macron.
Yeah.
All of them had Build Back Better. All of them from different countries had the same slogan. They also happened to be graduates of the same organization, the World Economic Forum, the Young Leaders Program, who Klaus Schwab happened to boast about, saying that he had penetrated the happiness of the world. So again, that's what it's like because when you're on that comic mastermind level, you think you're untouchable. You need to boast about clips. Now, we've gone from the Great Reset to Build Back Better to the third piece of the puzzle, and that's called the New World Order. Again, people call that a conspiracy theory. Again, I encourage people to go to my Substack, Radical Media, Maajid Nawaz on Substack. It's maajidnawaz.substack.com, and find an article called Biden Chillingly Declares a New World Order. In that article, you'll find a video of President Biden chillingly declaring a new world order. That's just the truth of the matter. In fact, you know what? It might even pick it up if I play it for you just from my screen. At least you'll get the audio, which kind of demonstrates the point, because this is the third piece of the puzzle, and that's the new world order. So let's see if we can have a listen to this.
We are at an inflection point, I believe, in the world economy. Not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations. As one of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people died, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it.
Right. So what you just heard there is a few very worrying places. One was, he says, there's a new world order. We've got to lead it, and we've got to unite the world behind it. That's the globalist mission. One world governance under a new world order. The problem is, he mentioned 60 million people dying. Now, if you recall at the beginning of our conversation, I went back to the printing press and said there was a 30 years war, and that led to a lot of death until power was moved from the church to capitalism, to governments. Now, what Biden's saying is, for this new world order, he went back, he said, like 1940, there's going to be another whole bunch of people dying. 6 million is a figure he gave from. But what he's implying is that to get this new world, there's going to be a lot of death, because naturally, whenever power shifts in this way, you have war and conflict. But let there be no doubt, he declared in that video, you heard it from his own words, a new world order. So why am I mentioning this? Because that's the 3 pieces there. What is the World Economic Forum? The World Economic Forum is a global organization that seeks to penetrate governments around the world, and that's a direct quote from its head, Klaus Schwab, in order to facilitate the Great Reset, which is the controlled demolition of our financial system. And when you engage in a controlled demolition of our financial system, you're also engaged in a controlled demolition of our governance system, because that comes from the former, right? The financial system sets up the politics. So the Great Reset is the controlled demolition of our financial system, which we're observing. For example, the lockdown and all the money printing that occurred during lockdown, and now the runaway inflation, all of this leading to the Fiat money becoming worthless, is the controlled demolition of our financial system. That's the Great Reset. Then Build Back Better, right? Build Back Better, and sort of rebuild everything that they've destroyed. And then, of course, the third element, build back towards what? A new world order. And that new world order will be if they get their way, will be a technocratic tyranny. So the World Economic Forum is the global organization seeking to bring about these 3. The Great Reset, so they can build back better towards a new world order. How do we know that? Because a man wrote a bloody book about it. The book's called The Great Reset. That's how we know it. I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory when he's written a book called The Great Reset, telling us what he wants to do. Now, the only difference between us and them is they think what they want to do is great. They think it's the solution to the problem of fiat money becoming worthless and the global financial system no longer tolerating, for example, a US monopoly on money printing, which is effectively what the Federal Reserve has after 1971, when Nixon decoupled the dollar from the gold standard. They recognize the world's no longer going to tolerate that. The illusion is falling away. And so the World Economic Forum is an attempt to usher the world under, as you heard Biden, still under their leadership, to a new way of doing things. And the reason we see right now is because there's a whole bunch of people in the world, and I'd argue with you, most of the global south is certainly at the forefront of this, a whole bunch of people in the world that are not happy with the fact that they want to build back better towards a new world order, and are trying instead to say, listen, we don't want yet another unipolar world led by one power on the planet that has a monopoly on the financial system and therefore on the geopolitical planet. What we want to move towards, if this old system is dying, right? If Dracula is finally dead, we want to move towards is a multipolar world. Now, that's the conflict you're seeing there between the countries and Biden, his US, under the Biden administration, Biden's allies. I won't say America, because America's divided over this question. It's the Democratic Party and Biden who are leading the globalist charge for the US. So that's the conflict. And the multipolar world that the other countries want, the BRICS and other countries, see, that will facilitate decentralization a lot easier. Neither are, for me, if you ask me, I don't believe in big government, right? I believe government, by definition, the stronger it gets, the weaker the human soul gets. And I'm all about humanity. I'm not about governments. But if you're going to look at this like which direction should we move, it becomes obvious if you believe in decentralization that a multipolar world would facilitate decentralization a lot faster than one global government under a new world order.
The World Economic Forum actually is now kind of trying to erase those ties. They're almost trying to delete the evidence of them being connected to FTX.
Let's quickly link FTX to this. So how does FTX tie into all of that? Well, think about it, right? So you've got a controlled demolition of the financial order in the form of the Great Reset, which is Klaus Schwab. To achieve that, you need to very rapidly diminish the value of money, which is already being done, but also facilitate an interest for alternatives to money, which are cryptos, but they're not really decentralized cryptos. They're basically digital tokens that are owned centrally. And this is the big debate inside the crypto world. I don't need to tell you that, right? Now, the collapse of FTX, what does that achieve? Well, see, they've already said, so Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, has already said that this now, it's reported by the New York Post, among others, this is an opportunity to regulate the entire crypto world. So what they're going to try to do now, use collapse FTX to regulate decentralized cryptocurrencies, because that's what they really fear. We know that China already did that with Bitcoin. What they want is to control the money supply. You can't control that if decentralized cryptos exist. And so they will try and use this FTX collapse to bring in the regulation by demonstrating just how dangerous it can be in the wild west of crypto in their view. That's why they want the regulation now. Of course, the FTX served many functions. It served the whole money laundering scheme through Ukraine. It served many functions, but one of them, at least in its collapse, one of the functions it will now serve is the calls for regulation, which we're already beginning to see.
That's what made me start asking the question. And what I've meant by it lately is like, what was FTX? Was this the purpose all along? Like, was this a crypto exchange? For many of us, it's where people have traded, right? They viewed it as just a place they could trade, make money, buy Bitcoin, buy any altcoins, right? And in its collapse, it's starting to pose the question, maybe this was a lot darker all along. Like, if instead of it being a cryptocurrency exchange that collapsed, that's now going to lead to this, what if this was the plan? Like, this intentionally happened the way it was, especially the way that over the past few days, even after they went bankrupt, they hacked themselves. He is now still free to tweet. There's been New York Times and mainstream media articles kind of saying this is, it's almost like puff pieces. They're playing it up as if, Madoff made some wrong decisions instead of just outright fraud. And it is a scary thing where the leader, one of the most powerful people in the crypto industry, one of our only chances, I think, for people to have financial privacy in the future, someone that looked like a leader in that space might actually have been an actor that's now helping facilitate governments take control.
Look, that kid is a LARPer. He's a LARPer. And nobody should, it's important we're not naive about this, right? The whole thing was an inside job. So let me just talk you through something, because I'm going to publish tonight on Radical Media, maajidnawaz.substack.com, some of this that we're going through right now that we're talking through. But while we're on the subject, let me just pull up some of the references here, because all you need to understand is the relationships. It's not, as you've said, it's not just the World Economic Forum, right? It's also Tony Blair, Bill Clinton. But let's take it a step further and join all the dots and understand, why was this an inside job? So, for example, you're correct. This does appear to be a complete setup. Let's use the word inside job, because people understand that language. So let's look at, for example, the Securities and Exchange Commission, right? Gary Gensler, who's there. The problem here is that, as Congressman Tom Emmer, Republican, has already tweeted about SEC Chair Gary Gensler, and this tweet's on the 10th of November, and he says, interesting, Gary Gensler runs to the media while reports to my office allege he was helping SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, and FTX work on legal loopholes to obtain a regulatory monopoly. We're looking into this. Now, Fortune Crypto reported on the 11th of November, and I'm just going to read the quote for you. Gensler, a former, this is why I'm saying inside job. Pay attention to these words. And that's why I use the word inside job on purpose, because people in the financial industry, when we think of the Wolf of Wall Street, we understand what inside job is, yeah? Fortune Crypto reports on the 11th of November. Gensler, a former campaign finance chair for Hillary Clinton. Already, you're going to start seeing dodginess, yeah? Gensler, a former campaign finance chair for Hillary Clinton, is of course not the only prominent Democrat who may have been willing to flex his influence on behalf of FTX. Sam Bankman-Fried, you may recall, was one of the biggest donors to President Joe Biden, while his parents, both Stanford law professors, have ties to the party. His mother, Barbara Fried, leads a group called Mind the Gap that helps raise Silicon Valley cash for Democrats, while his father, Joseph Bankman, drafted tax legislation for the powerful Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's a Democrat from Massachusetts. It's not a stretch to imagine Sam Bankman-Fried sought to exploit these political ties to his benefit. All of this does not mean that SBF, Gensler, and other high-ups in the Democratic Party sat around plotting an explicit scheme to hand the crypto industry to FTX. That reeks too much of a wild conspiracy theory. I sense there, Luke, Fortune Crypto, in writing, is being very, very facetious, and actually do suspect that there's a plot. Just as anyone rational and normal reading that would suspect this was an inside job, because you end up with an SEC chair, Gensler, who happens to be the former campaign finance chair for Hillary Clinton, who happens to be the most prominent Democrat outside of Bill Clinton in the party, and SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, happens to be have become their second largest donor after none other than George Soros. And we know that federal taxpayer money was going to Ukraine. We know that the Ukrainian government, they put it on their website, by the way, has a deal with BlackRock, right? They put it on their website. In fact, I'll read that for you as well from the Ukrainian government's own website, just to be absolutely clear for you. And again, as I said, this will come out on maajidnawaz.substack.com either tonight or latest tomorrow morning, but probably tonight.
And for people listening and watching, I'll link that down below so you don't have to remember that. If you're listening on iTunes and Spotify, that link's right below.
Ukraine's Ministry of Economy, right? Reports on the 11th of November, and I've got the website screen grab in the article and everything. The headline of the article is called Ministry of Economy signed a memorandum with the world's largest investment company. Here's a direct quote from the Ukrainian Ministry of Economy website. The Ministry of Economy of Ukraine and BlackRock, the world's largest investment company, have signed a memorandum of understanding agreeing on a framework for consultative assistance in developing a special platform to attract private capital for the recovery and support of Ukraine's economy. In other words, post-conflict reconstruction. Now, that matters because what we know already is that Zelensky in Ukraine had planned for Ukraine to become ground zero for the rollout of CBDCs, central banking digital coupons, as the official currency of Ukraine post-conflict. Ukraine was set to become the prototype city of how to run a technocratic setup. It was meant to become the globalists' prime example, exhibit A of what technocracy could look like. They had planned for it to become, as I said, ground zero, and BlackRock was involved. And that's why, if you go to the World Economic Forum website, you'll find, unless they've removed it, you'll find a document called Governing Smart Cities. And Ukraine is listed there as one of their smart cities. They've got a smart city design concept for Ukraine. And that's why in July 2021, Ukraine's parliament passed a law regulating payment methods that listed a future CBDC in Ukraine as becoming legal tender, just like cash is legal tender. Yeah. And Zelensky signed that into law in late July, right? So, and it would allow the Ukrainian central bank to issue central banking digital coupons. All of this is relevant because, as we know, FTX was the exchange the Ukrainian government had a relationship.
Exactly. And Maajid, I'm going to pause you for a second there. This is the third fact that I want people to understand here. I want to pause for a second and just make this very clear. This is not looping some dot and tying it into the story and making it relevant. This is something where 6 months ago, you go back to the news when it originally dropped. I believe it was in March or maybe it was probably in March of this year. There's a fact. It was originally published that FTX was partnering with the National Bank of Ukraine to handle their crypto donations. What we've learned to figure out is not only were they helping them exchange crypto and taking crypto and getting it to Ukraine, money that was donated to Ukraine that needed to be converted was then passed from Ukraine back to FTX. So this is a two-way flow of money, of taxpayer dollars that are being sent to Ukraine is then going to FTX, but also money from around the world, foreign entities, is going through FTX into Ukraine. There's a $10 billion gap in FTX's balance sheet.
Whoa.
So we already know no one can track where this money is coming in and out. But there is now a funnel of taxpayer dollars, foreign entity money going through FTX to Ukraine, back and forth. So I just wanted to make that very clear for people as you kind of rope this all in. And I know there's some people listening are saying, how can they make this a Ukraine thing? This is integral to the story. This is a fact of the story. This is not something that's being roped in.
No, it's a fundamental pillar of the story. And you're right to emphasize that because that is the wealthiest fund on the planet. BlackRock and the Ukrainian government have already got this. It's on their website, as I said. And FTX is the exchange. Again, that's not in dispute. FTX was the exchange that the Ukrainian central bank were going to use to implement the BlackRock plan to install CBDCs in Ukraine as part of their post-conflict reconstruction. And the what you just described there and how the money went from the US federal government to Ukraine, back to FTX, back to the Democratic Party is this. I don't know if you can see that.
And I'll show it on the screen for people listening. This is a perfect diagram showing the flow of money, taxpayers to Ukraine, to Sam, back to the Democratic Party, and back and forth between all of them.
So this is going to be the stuff of movies, right? This is like when with 2008, Too Big to Fail. We're talking that scale of a scandal, that level.
Yeah, this isn't just crypto anymore. This is one of the strongest powers in the world. This is the free world now being corrupted to level. Like this is such a bigger story than a crypto one, and I hope people can grasp that.
The story in corporatist press is currently reporting, which is the first line of the article that you're going to thank you. You're going to put the link to because it's important that we're getting half the story. The corporatist press is giving us the story that it is a collapse and it wasn't expected. The truth is, as we've been discussing, this is a very deeply sinister inside job, just as 2008 was. And it's why I began by saying it's inherent to our international financial system, which is why it will collapse. There will be an apocalypse. And I mean apocalypse in the original linguistic meaning of that phrase, which actually means revelation. It means an unveiling. People's eyes will become open to the illusion that is the international financial system. A bit like Dorothy, when she found the wizard in the Emerald City, emerald, the color of the bank. She followed the yellow brick road, right? She followed the gold. And she, along the way, had to find her courage, her mind, and her heart, which is what men today have lost. Men have lost their courage, their intellect, and their hearts chasing money, right? And as a result, the innocence of children is being squandered, which is what that whole film is about. Dorothy the child, she has to find the men who have to rediscover through discovering the innocence of childhood what's worth protecting, which is innocence. They have to rediscover their courage, their mind, and their heart, and then they lead and protect Dorothy. They lead her down the yellow brick road, follow the gold to the Emerald City, which is the color of money. And then you find the wizard, you pull the curtain back, but because she's got courage, intellect, and heart standing with her, she's no longer scared. She pulls the curtain back and the whole thing is a crappy illusion. The emperor has no clothes. That's what we're going to be discovering. That's what I mean by the word apocalypse. There's going to be a lot of people realizing this. And when you realize that, what does it do to money? Of course, like FTX, the minute confidence falls, there's a collapse because the whole thing rests on confidence. And you can't have that belief or confidence once the illusion is lifted. And it's why we are genuinely in this crossroads. It's either going to go towards autocracy and tyranny, technocratic tyranny, or we're going to have a much better golden future, at least for a few years. It'll be a golden era. But that's all up for grabs. It's why it's so important that people like us speak. And it's why important we take this damn seriously. Because I don't mean, look, guys, you might be listening thinking, who the hell is this guy? I have been through a torture dungeon in Egypt, right? For attempting to overthrow the Egyptian government. I am serious when I say to you, take this seriously. This is not a joke. We are at a crossroads and we get to define our own future. It is that important. We either define our own future for us and our children in a way that is decentralized, that is more directly democratic, that is more local to our communities, community-based, yeah? Or we end up in an irreversible tyranny because once this technocracy is enforced, I mean, think the Chinese social credit system, the Chinese state, one-party rule, but with all the technocratic prowess, the West king it, with programmable money that you cannot, surveillance tech, every single move you purchase, every thought will be monitored. Everything you search online, connected to your health data, all monitored. And if you say the wrong thing, your health care could be deprived. They could say, sorry, your credits expire, you can't use the hospital. And that's it. You're a slave forever. That's how important it is, So we have to understand that that's the moment where the story is far bigger than the corporatist press is letting on. And everybody in the crypto space needs to now, I think it's time to make a choice about the direction of travel they want to take.
My only fear in this moment as people hopefully wake up to this. I know people listening, I imagine this is turning some gears. I shared a video yesterday of Ken Griffin, CEO of Citadel Securities, one of the largest market makers in the world, one of the largest hedge funds in the world. And he's kind of pointing to some of these ties, just letting the audience, he says, you can come to your own conclusions. And me posting that video, a lot of people kind of are starting to recognize these things we're talking about, these underlying things we're talking about. I also got an alarming amount of feedback that so quickly shrugged it off to their ideology, their two-party system in the U.S. and saying, you're only doing this because it's against Dems. Or, he also donates to Republicans. What's the story, right? Both sides do it. The scary thing that I hope people can at least look past that and seeing that you just highlighted is this isn't Republican versus Democrat. This is the freedom of everyone here. If we lose this battle, right, if they are able to achieve what they're trying to do with this inside job, it doesn't matter if you're Democratic or Republican. You're under rule of these people, right? In the future, it won't matter, what social beliefs you have or whatever. It is going to be under one rule, and I hope people can kind of put aside those two beliefs. Maajid, before we wrap up here, I know you're short on time. You've talked a little bit about how ideas can direct finance, and I kind of want to wrap up with this. Finance controls everything in our world, and we're seeing that with the World Economic Forum and what this scandal is showing to people. Can you explain that concept, ideas directing finance, and why that's so important for people to realize?
Well, I'm happy you asked, and it gives me an opportunity to wrap up as well. And thank you for being sensitive of time. I have another live stream I have to get to. Otherwise, I would have enjoyed sitting and talking to you for a while. But I did this interview on Tucker today that was published this month. It's on exclusive to Fox Nation. I don't know if anyone can get hold of it unless you subscribe there. So I apologize, but there's a quote from there, which is on my Twitter feed. And I'll put it in the link to the video of that quote will be in the same article that I've mentioned a few times in this chat. And the quote is, above left and right wing sits finance, and above finance sit ideas about our civilizational direction of travel. If you're someone with these civilizational ideas and you have finance, you can fund both left and right to advance your direction of travel. But what I mean by that is take somebody like George Soros, even take somebody like Sam Bankman-Fried, who was clearly a LARPer attempting to be a George Soros. But Soros has funded various sides of any given issue or any given party, depending on what he wants to achieve with that funding. So that's the role that finance can play. It can fund both parties. It can fund one party over the other. It can change sides when it suits it, depending on what it is in its benefits to support. And obviously, finance will choose what suits finance. That much should be obvious. But above finance sits an idea. And why I mention that, because finance doesn't have a mind of its own. People tend, like Soros, in the Open Society Forum, people tend to have some form of vision, imagination as to what they want to do with their money and what kind of world they want to create. And that's where the real debate lies. It's about the civilization direction we wish to take, which I'd say is currently in a crossroads. Either we go towards technocratic tyranny or we go towards decentralization. So they're the sorts of ideas I argue sit above finance, because if we can win that debate, it doesn't matter if you've got money or not. If you can win that debate, the money will come to the strongest ideas, as long as those ideas are allowed to be debated. And this touches on the last thing I'd like to raise here. You'll hear, and you will continue to hear, and you probably heard already, lots of people, they get to this point about global financial system and the banking system, they get to the international finance thing, and then they go wrong. They end up making it about one particular race, one particular ethnicity. And it's why I'm arguing that, and that's very dangerous, because it undermines everything we're trying to do. What I'm trying to say is it's ideas that matter. And if the ideas you hold on to, by definition, those ideas, they supersede. Look, I'm a Pakistani Muslim British man talking to you, Luke. You're a white man, right? Unless you identify as a black man. I mean, that's you. Let's see. But we're having this conversation. If we can agree on an idea, suddenly everything else evaporates. Yeah. I no longer look at you as a white American male. You may not. We end up realizing actually we're of common purpose, and we start working towards that common purpose. It's why ideas are really, truly what govern the future of the world, not race. And so it's important that we focus on the right thing. But remember something. How did empire succeed? And we're talking of an empire here, right? This is the global financial empire, and it's been there for a long time. People don't realize how long we've been mentally enslaved. But how do empires succeed? We know that from the British Empire, which was also, by the way, a front for this empire. Really, this empire has always been there, is the international money markets. They've been behind this 1 and 2 as well. But how empires succeed is through divide and conquer. So some people get to this stage of the conversation and then they succumb to the divide and conquering. And they end up turning on each other and pointing fingers on lower frequency conversations. Skin color, ethnicity, religious identity. Look, I'm a very proud Muslim, but I'll say something very clearly, that if you and I agree that we need a decentralized, we need a secure, private, decentralized world, with local governance and direct democracy, if you and I agree with that, then you're my brother and you're my friend on a human level, before any member of ISIS, before any member of Al-Qaeda, before any extremist organization, right? So we would then end up working together. So it's not about race, religion, it's about these ideas. And so that's why I'm glad you mentioned that, because it also gives me the opportunity to encourage people when having these conversations. Now the crypto community is going to go wild with these conversations because of FTX. We've got to remain focused and stay on top. What sits above ideas, not race. And if we can agree on the ideas that make a better future, that's what we should rally around. Look, there will be a correlation. I'm infamous for arguing as a Muslim that we need to challenge more some of the extremism that emerged in the last decade, because frankly, there was a very sad correlation between people coming from my community and falling for false flag operations and engaging in what security services in some instances were encouraging, terrorism, right? Yep. And that terrorism was leading to a situation where Muslims were getting a bad reputation. Now, if you recognize this correlation and you understand what's really going on here, that's all, by the way, part of this kind of global geopolitical struggle, yeah? You understand that really they're pawns in a wider war, and the wider war, this war about ideas for the future of governments on the planet. So let's focus on the ideas. Of course, we condemn, anyone breaks the law, crime, criminal behavior, bigotry, extremism. all of that should be condemned when it arises. But what we rally around isn't the negative. We rally around the positive, and that's the decentralized, directly democratic future. In other words, rally around the ideas, and you'll find that it'll be a lot easier to have these conversations. Let's not succumb to the divide and conquer.
Powerful stuff. Maajid, I appreciate you shining a light on this, taking us down the rabbit hole. My brother, I appreciate you, man. I wish we had more time. If we ever chat again in the future, I would love to. And for everyone watching, listening, his links are right down below. You can follow, keep up with Maajid. I'll also link his article. Anything we talked about will be down there. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to subscribe. I'm going to keep talking about the biggest ideas in crypto. Maajid, until next time, thank you, man.
A pleasure. Thank you very much, Lou.